Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brittany Unfiltered. Happy Tuesday to all of you guys. We have got so much to talk about. I'm not even going to do much of an intro today. We're just going to jump right into it because this week has been explosive for news. So much has happened since last time I was here with you guys. And I really wanted to make sure that we touch on the big stuff without keeping you guys for too long. So first of all, the big story today, obviously, the Jussie Smollett bombshell, which dropped late morning, early afternoon. And in case some of you are not like me, where you just live on social media because it's your job and you just ingest news all day and try to pick through all the pieces and analyze it, this is something that you've probably heard as you've gone throughout your day, but you might not know all the details of because maybe you were, dealing with your kids or you have to, actually work a job and you can't catch up with all this stuff till you get home at night. But I did want to hit on this because this is an absolutely crazy story and probably one of the biggest piles of absolute horse crap that I've come across in a long time. And that includes the Mueller Report, which obviously broke over the weekend, which we are going to touch on here in just a minute. But I wanted to talk about the Jussie Smollett story and kind of put it in some context here. Now, remember, this is the guy he's the Empire actor who, a few weeks ago or so, it turns out that, he had gone to the Chicago police and claimed that he had been attacked by two white guys wearing MAGA hats in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. in downtown Chicago, because that's where white guys wearing MAGA hats typically hang out, is downtown Chicago at 2 a.m., and that they dumped bleach on him or some kind of chemical, and they hung a rope around his neck and called him all kinds of racial and homophobic slurs and all this stuff and beat him up. And he ended up going to the hospital, and then he went to the police and he filed a hate crime report, and it got national news attention. All right, this story went everywhere. They featured it on Good Morning America. It made headlines all over the place. CNN's Don Lemon was going on and on and on about how this is so obviously an example of how MAGA hat wearers and Trump supporters are violent racists, and things like this happen all the time against black men, particularly black gay men or black gay liberal men, which is some, trifecta of victimization here. It turns out the Chicago police, of course, immediately investigated this because it's not like there are, a million murderers happening every single day in Chicago and, babies getting shot in the head in drive-by gang shootings or anything. They obviously wanted to handle this case because it got so much national attention. Lots of police resources were diverted in order to investigate this, and it turns out a few weeks later, the Chicago police came out and said none of it happened. Smollett made the whole thing up. And he actually, the story is that he was pissed off that he only makes like $1 million from his show Empire, which is apparently not enough, and he needed attention so that he could make more money, which, I don't know, I've never made $1 million, so apparently that's not enough for Smollett. So he ended up concocting this whole story. They've got video surveillance of two Nigerian brothers, one of whom Smollett actually had worked with, not white guys, two Nigerian brothers who went into a local hardware store and they bought two red hats, not MAGA hats, just regular red hats, and rope and bleach or whatever. And they've got video surveillance of these guys then going and sitting on a bench and waiting for Smollett to show up. Police say that they've got a check that Smollett actually wrote to these guys to pay them for staging the attack, and that this whole thing was complete and total bunk that he made up in order to get attention and apparently to get paid more. And police have all the evidence. In fact, they had so much evidence that a grand jury ended up returning 16 indictments against Smollett for staging a hate crime and for stealing police resources. So now, of course, today, the big bombshell that dropped was that the Cook County State Attorney decided to drop all charges against Smollett, all 16 felony counts, and their reasoning was ridiculous beyond description. Their reasoning was, first of all, he had to forfeit his $10,000 bond that he had paid. So $10,000 is apparently the going rate to get you out of 16 felony counts in Chicago. Okay, so it comes out to about $625 per indictment, by the way. And also that the argument here was, well, if he had been convicted of this, he probably would have just ended up with some community service, and he's already done some community service. So really, it all just kind of comes out in the wash. That was the argument here. Did a little bit of community service, paid $10,000 in bond, we're going to just let him go. And then, to really just dump some cherries on top of this whole thing, Smollett comes out with his attorney, stands in front of the cameras today, and doesn't even admit that he did anything wrong. We don't even get an apology out of this guy. Instead, he decides to stick by his story. He comes out and he says, look, I've been the real victim here. I have been honest and consistent the whole time with my story, and clearly I did nothing wrong, even though they've got evidence against him. They've got video evidence. They've got a check that he signed. He has a history of doing this kind of stuff before, by the way. All you have to do is do a quick Google search and you can find all of that. He wants us to believe that he's the real victim here, okay? Which is interesting to me because he comes out and he says that he's been truthful and consistent in his story, even though his attorney, in that same press conference today, admitted that it was the two Nigerian brothers who attacked him. They're not disputing that, which, really sucks for those guys. I wonder how those bus tires feel. You get paid to stage an attack and then you just get blamed for the whole thing, while the guy who paid you stands there like he didn't know what was going on the whole time. So I don't see how it's truthful and consistent when your original story was two white guys in MAGA hats attacked me, and now you're saying, well, it wasn't two white guys, it was actually two Nigerian guys, but I've been truthful and consistent this whole time, my story hasn't changed. That would be a really good example of how your story has changed. So we're supposed to believe that, again, he's the real victim here. Get this, though. This adds a whole other layer of complication to this story, which just makes the whole thing even crazier. The state attorney who came out and said that they were dropping the charges against Smollett, her name is Kim Foxx. Get this. A police union has actually called for a federal investigation into Foxx because she tried to help Smollett per a family request that came through an attorney who was connected to both the Obamas and the Rahm Emanuel's family, and was also the former chief of staff to Michelle Obama. Now, I'm not saying that Michelle Obama had anything to do with it, but this was a very politically connected attorney who happened to know the Smollett family, who came to Fox and said, hey, if you could do these guys a solid, they'd really appreciate it. Could you get the local Chicago police to drop the case and transfer it to the FBI? Well, the Chicago Tribune ran an entire expose where they got a hold of emails where Fox essentially said, yeah, sure, I'll try. So she ended up not being successful, and she recused herself from the case, citing a conflict of interest. But this is a state attorney who is provably tried to help this guy in the past per a family's request that came through a politically connected attorney. And now she's coming out and saying, well, he did some community service and he paid a $10,000 bond, so we're going to drop all the charges. Does anybody else think that that's just a little shifty? Does that ring any bells to anybody? That there might be something more going on here, that this might be a little more about politics and a little bit more about, the fact that this guy was black and he was gay and he was liberal and his story was used to paint Trump supporters as violent felons. And oh, by the way, this just happens to be coming on the heels of the Mueller story, which of course the entire left wants to pivot from as quickly as possible. So, again, I'm not saying that I have some grand insight into how all of these strings are all woven together, but does it not seem like this is just a little bit too convenient that this guy had 16 felony counts against him? There's a mountain of proof against him, higher than Mount Rushmore, and yet community service and a $10,000 bond is apparently all it takes to get you off of faking a hate crime, wasting police resources, wasting taxpayer resources, and going all over the national news media talking about how you're a poor little victim. This whole thing, it's spitting on the justice system. It's making an absolute mockery of it. It's a shame, really, for the local police department, because apparently they are furious about it, because they actually did a lot of investigating into this story, and a lot of resources were diverted from other important things in order to focus on this, and that all turned out embarrassing. So, and here's the thing that I really wanted to point out, because obviously the details of this story are still coming out and they're crazy and it's a wild story in and of itself, but I want to point this out. If you happen to be out there and you're one of the few people who has not gotten it through your skull how in the world we ended up with Donald freaking Trump as the president of the United States, this right here is a great example of why. Here you have a liberal guy who played the black card and the gay card to paint himself as a victim, to try and stage a race hoax, to paint millions of people as racists. That was the narrative that the media ran with this, is that, these two supposed MAGA hat wearing white guys wandering around in Chicago assaulting black gay men were somehow indicative of all 63 million people that voted for Donald Trump. That was the narrative that was used here. That was what was pushed. And he can get away with that with zero consequences. This right here is why we have Donald Trump. This right here is why nearly 63 million people voted for him. Because conservative Americans are so sick of being lied to and being lied about by the left, who gets away with it scot-free. That is what they're tired of. They are so tired of the cover that is provided for guys like these, who can just do this stuff, and apparently it's not even a big deal. Which brings us to my second topic that I'm going to talk about after just a really quick break, and that is the Mueller report that we got over this past week, which is another clear indication of zero consequences for rampant lies that are spread about the right. We're going to talk about that right after this. Hang with me, guys. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Brittany Unfiltered. Thanks for hanging with me through the break. We've been talking today, obviously, about the big story that broke this afternoon, which is the Jussie Smollett story and just the crazy wackiness that surrounds that story. All the different little pieces of it are almost too ridiculous to pull together. And of course, all of this comes out in just these, gigantic pieces of information, and everybody's trying to absorb what's going on. And what ultimately it looks like is that there's some really sketchy stuff going on in Chicago, which I know is, must be a day that ends in Y. But here you have a guy who ultimately was charged with perpetrating a hate crime, a racially based hate crime, nonetheless, and is getting off scot-free. All right. The state attorney has said that they are dropping all the charges against this guy. He's going to get away without even so much as an apology. He's still maintaining his innocence. And this is a story that garnered national attention, not only because it was a supposed hate crime against this gay black guy, but it was also used to paint the right as a bunch of violent racists who clearly, this was all because Donald Trump has been dog whistling to racists and it's all his fault. And you never know which one of his 63 million voters is just a completely unhinged backcrap crazy loony and is going to come after you in the middle of the night in Chicago. And this was the narrative that was spun up. And it's interesting that this story just happened to come out right after the whole Mueller Report thing dropped, which left egg on the entire left's faces. All right, so now this story's come out, and the media is kind of deflecting, and now we're talking about this story and the fact that Smollett is being let off on all this. But it's interesting because there's a common thread through these stories, and this week kind of has a nice little umbrella over it as far as a theme here, and that's this idea that somehow in this country, we have gotten to the point where the left feels completely okay and totally shameless and does not fear any retribution whatsoever when they lie, just rampantly lie, because that's ultimately what it is, right? This isn't your opinion, my opinion. These are lies that are perpetrated against the right, against conservatives, against Trump voters, against Trump himself, and there are exactly zero consequences when it happens. When the truth finally comes out, everybody just kind of shrugs and sweeps it under the rug and, oh, okay, well, we're just going to move on from this. And there's never an apology. There's never any justice here. It just kind of seems like it's a given that the left can just lie through their teeth and get away with it. And I said before the break that if you were looking still, and I don't know why you would be after 2 years, but if you were still unclear on how Donald Trump became the president of the United States, that this is why, because conservative Americans are so tired of being lied about and having their reputations and their name and their beliefs completely smeared by the left with no consequences whatsoever, even when the truth comes out and is staring you right in the face. So again, we had that happen this weekend. We had that happen with the Mueller report. When I say the Mueller report is out, yes, I do understand that the Mueller report has not yet been released. There are a lot of T's that need to be crossed and I's that need to be dotted in order for that to happen. If it happens, there are legal reasons why that hasn't happened. I'm not going to get into all of those today because it takes too long. But suffice it to say, I do understand that the Mueller report itself is not out. Bill Barr, Attorney General, did put out a letter kind of summarizing the report, though, and saying, first of all, that Mueller found absolutely no evidence that Trump nor anybody in his campaign actively colluded with Russia in order to rig the 2016 election, and also that Mueller didn't make a recommendation one way or the other whether Trump obstructed justice by firing former FBI Director James Comey and left it up to the DOJ to decide. The DOJ decided there was not enough to indict the president on any counts of obstruction, largely because obstruction of justice requires intent. And if he hadn't done anything wrong in the first place, if there was no collusion to cover up, there couldn't have been intent to cover it up. Therefore, there could be no obstruction of justice. So that's ultimately where we were left. So again, what we saw here was there were a few. I'm going to give a couple of people credit here, but there were really no mea culpas from the left or from the media who have spent the last 2 years just driving home this narrative. Not even just the question of, but driving home this foregone conclusion that really we all knew Trump had colluded with Russia. There was all this evidence. There was all this proof. Everybody knew it. You would have to be just a complete and total moron with your head buried in the sand if you didn't know this. And that all we were waiting for was the Mueller report to come out and tell us what we already knew. Okay, that was kind of the left's mantra. That was the media's mantra. Now, of course, it comes out that none of that was true. Absolutely none of that was true. Which, you know, and here's my larger point, because I know that a lot of pundits have talked this to death, and I know that, you know, the basics of this are out there, but I really wanted to kind of drill down to the heart of this issue, because and listen, I'm not going to criticize the right for being happy about this. I'm not. I'm one of them. Okay, I actually happen to think that it's a good thing that we've got a sitting U.S. president who didn't conspire with a foreign power to steal an election. Maybe I'm nuts, but I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good piece of information that all Americans should be happy about, especially those liberals who claim to care so much about democracy and about, you know, people's ability to vote freely. You know, and so I think that's a good thing. But to me, I think that this story, not only does it indicate a serious problem with the left and their ability to just spin up these narratives and lie and lie and lie and get away with it, and then when the truth does come out, they don't even have to do so much as saying, I'm sorry, much less walk it all back, okay? I think what it also shows is a serious, serious problem in this country with a lack of caring about objective truth. And if you followed me at all for the last couple of years, you know that this is something that I've talked about a lot. The idea that truth is not subjective. There is no such thing as your truth. There is only the truth. Your truth is called your opinion. That's why we have the word opinion. All right. But the truth is something that is fact-based. It is evidence-based. It is solid. It does not change one way or the other based on your political affiliation, based on what you want to be true, based on what you want to believe, or based on any foregone conclusion that you have just assumed in your head. And we have lost sight of that in this country. Okay, we have lost sight of not only what is objective truth, but how we should pursue objective truth. We no longer demand that from our media. We don't demand it from ourselves. We spin up these theories based on what we already want. And we just kind of sit in our little camps and we plant our flags on either side and we wait for an opportunity to look at the other side after we're vindicated with something and go neener, neener. All right, that's ultimately what we do. And again, let me say this loud and clear. You can go back and look at my Twitter feed over the last 72 hours if you want. I am not criticizing the right for being happy that Trump was vindicated, for being happy. I think that it's a fantastic thing when some semblance of justice is done, even if it's only justice in the court of public opinion, when somebody who did not do something that they have been accused of ends up being vindicated, that is a good thing. When a sitting U.S. president ends up being exonerated of charges or allegations that he corroborated with a foreign power to win an election, that is a good thing. And we should be happy when that information comes out. Okay, so I'm not saying that the right should not be happy about that. What I am pointing out, though, is that rather than simply look at this as a snapshot in time, because that's what it's going to be, this is all going to fade to the annals of history at some point, along with every other presidential investigation, along with every other historical thing that's ever happened. This is going to fade. So what we need to do is we need to look at the lessons that we can learn here from this. And I think one of the most important ones is, can we not get back to a pursuit of truth and demanding that pursuit of truth from those who are supposed to be giving truth to us, from the media, from our lawmakers? I know that's a really high bar to set because they're politicians, but can we not get back to understanding that truth is not just what you want it to be. Truth is not just what you would like it to be. Truth is what the evidence says. One thing that I have tried to be extremely consistent about over the last couple of years is I have never once, up until this past weekend, I have never once stated that there was no collusion. I have stated multiple times that there has been no evidence presented of collusion between Trump and Russia, because that was true. It was true that there was no evidence that had been presented whatsoever. Now, in my own personal view, over the last 2 years, I began to grow increasingly convinced that there wasn't going to be proof of collusion. And that came from a multitude of places, from the fact that all of these bombshell reports were dropping right, left, and sideways, and none of them ended up being true, from the fact that you had proven communications from Lisa Page and Peter Strzok that there might have been talk within the FBI about taking Trump down even before he was elected. The fact that the media kept spinning up these narratives and then having to walk them back or drop them like hot rocks because they ended up just being completely bungled with errors. Not to mention the fact that, in my opinion, it started to become obvious that if something was going to be found, then the entire liberal media digging into it for 2 years would have turned it up at some point. So I became increasingly convinced that there probably wasn't going to be evidence of collusion, but I never specifically said that. Because, again, I believe in waiting for the facts to come out. I believe in waiting for the evidence to come out and going where that takes us rather than what I wanted or what I believed in personally. And I want to take this as a moment to recognize that that's ultimately what we need to get back to in this country, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, is a pursuit of objective truth. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave that as far as the Mueller report, because I know other angles have been talked to death. That's where I sit on that. I've got one other topic I want to talk to you guys about, answering a Twitter question that I got just a couple of days ago. I'm going to take one more really quick break. I'll be right back with you guys. Hang with me. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. Thanks for sticking with me through the break. We've been talking a lot today just about some of the crazy stuff that's been going on in the news cycle. I know it has been a ton of stuff and a ton of stuff to digest. And we talked a little bit about the Jussie Smollett case and the bombshell that dropped today. And then we talked a little bit about the Mueller report and kind of my thoughts on that. Again, I know those issues have been talked to death. But one thing that I did want to talk about too, I told you guys to send me your questions about things that you wanted me to address. And one of the ones that I got after last week's episode was I got two different questions, one asking me my opinion about the Electoral College, and then one asking me to talk about Nancy Pelosi's theory that we should lower the voting age to 16. And I think that those two topics really go hand in hand and make for just a really good thread there, just because these are both things that the left likes to use in order to, you want to talk about rigging elections, this is ultimately a way to rig elections in their favor and ultimately create just almost an impossibility for Republicans to ever win an election again. So my thoughts on the voting age being lowered to 16. Obviously, I think that this is ridiculous. Obviously, I think that Nancy Pelosi knows that it's ridiculous, and I think that it is a complete and total scheme. First of all, if you are 16 and you're watching this, kudos to you. That's awesome. I'm not saying that you're stupid or that your opinion doesn't matter, or that maybe that you're not even intelligent enough or smart enough to vote, because you very well may be. But that's not my reason for saying that 16-year-olds should not vote. First of all, until you are 18, you are not afforded all of the rights and privileges of an adult in the United States. You're just not. There is a reason for that. It's not because we think that 16-year-olds are any less valuable than 18-year-olds. It's because there is an understanding that you have an adolescent phase in which you are learning things, that you are not yet equipped to deal with all of the issues of adulthood. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of 18-year-olds, I know I wasn't when I was 18, equipped to deal with all the issues of adulthood. So 16 is an age where you are still growing, right? You may be just experiencing that first job. You may be just driving for the first time. These are all important stages to go through, and that is an incredibly important stage to go through, okay? But at 16, you don't possess the knowledge or the life experience to make good, well-informed decisions on who is going to ultimately control your life, all right, or who is going to have a say in it. All right, you have not worked long enough to make informed decisions about what tax brackets should be. You might not even know what a tax bracket is, to be honest. Now, again, this is not to say that 16-year-olds are stupid. Stupidity is a lack of intelligence. Ignorance is a lack of information. At 16, you are ignorant about a great many things. So I don't think that the voting age should be lowered to 16. For heaven's sake, we just went through an entire year where we were having to tell 16-year-olds not to eat Tide Pods and snort condoms, okay? So we clearly have an issue here with, 16-year-olds and their judgment. So I think that's ridiculous. I think Nancy Pelosi knows that it's ridiculous. And I think that, again, she gave the game away in her phrasing when she says we need to capture these young people as they're learning about government, because I think, first of all, she wants to play on that ignorance. She wants to play on the fact that, yes, they're learning about government from liberal educational institutions that are indoctrinating them, so they're still learning. They don't actually have a good handle on it. But also, we need to capture them, right? We need to make sure that we hook them real early on. Not we need to make sure we give them a voice. We need to capture them. I think that this is the same exact reason why you see this really heavy push on the left to do away with the Electoral College. Notice how you didn't see widespread calls for this before the 2016 election, before Hillary Clinton. You saw some of it back in the Bush era, but it's really picked up a lot of steam. And now you've got these widespread calls to do away with the Electoral College. Again, I not only think that's ridiculous, I think it's insulting, and I'm going to tell you why. It's another tool that the left wants to use to make sure that Republicans can't win elections. They hate the fact that we are a two-party system, that they even have a chance of losing. All right, they want guaranteed election winning for life. That's what they want. It's the same reason they want to lower the voting age. It's the same reason why they fight voter registration laws and ID laws. It's the same reason why they want to grant illegal aliens, citizenship and put millions of them on the voter rolls. They want to stack the deck so much against Republicans by changing the system that they are guaranteed elections because they can't win them on the issues. They can win them in certain areas, but they're having trouble winning on the issues. The Green New Deal is a really great example of that. And I hate to keep harping on it because I know that many of us view it as absolutely ridiculous, but it is a wonderful example of exactly where the left wants to go with their agenda in this country. And we have to take it seriously because it's already been adopted and it's already been signed on to by multiple Democratic 2020 contenders. So this is clearly where they want to take the country, cow farts and all. All right, that's the direction they want to go. And they can't win on that. So it's easier to change the system. It's easier to rig the system. So I want to talk a little bit about the Electoral College because I know that there's even a lack of understanding of that about the Electoral College on the right. And a lot of people are for it, but they don't necessarily know why. So I want to talk a little bit about what it does and what it protects us from. One of the things you will hear most often about the Electoral College is that it keeps Middle America and smaller counties and towns and rural America from being completely steamrolled by cities. That is absolutely true. So if you go to a populist vote, if you go to just a straight up population vote and you do away with the Electoral College completely, you are disenfranchising millions of people in flyover states or in small towns because several U.S. cities that have the most people, population-wise, are just going to completely dominate. So it's not even going to matter how you vote in Kansas because New York City and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles and Atlanta are just going to completely steamroll you, and you might as well not even vote. All right? Liberals know this. Cities are most often liberal. They want to stack the deck. The other thing, though, that ultimately does is not only does it disenfranchise people, not only does it make your voice completely worthless because you're just going to get dominated by cities, it also means that the issues that affect rural America are going to get lost. And this is incredibly important for the entire country and for people to really understand. If people in middle America no longer have a say in their government, then the issues that affect them are no longer going to be prioritized. This is incredibly dangerous because there are important things that happen in rural America. There are the agriculture sector, the energy sector, a lot of our environment, if you care about that, happens in these rural areas. So when places like New York City or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles start making all the decisions, then the things that affect middle America end up getting lost. All right. If you've never stepped foot outside of San Francisco, you probably don't know what rules and regulations are best for helping people grow corn. You don't. And that's okay that you don't. But the people in middle America who grow the corn, they probably know. And it's probably good that they have a say in our government because they can actually express what they need, okay, and what's going to help them. And that ultimately helps America. So it makes sure that all of the issues across an incredibly large, incredibly diverse country are represented, which you would think would be very important to liberals because after all, they're all about diversity, right? They're all about diversity so long as it's their kind of diversity and they end up winning the election. So again, that is why it's incredibly important to make sure that middle America has a voice, not only so that they obviously have a voice in their own elections in their own country, but also that their issues get represented, which is good for the entire nation. The other thing that it does, and historians have noted this many, many times, but I don't think it gets talked about enough, is particularly for the left, who is apparently so concerned about democracy and so concerned about rigging elections and stealing elections, the Electoral College actually helps protect against that. So if you have a population-based vote, just a straight population vote, it's very, very easy to steal an election. All you have to do is rig an election in a large city. All you have to do is target one particular area and change things around or do something a little bit shady. So you can target New York City, you can target LA, you can target DC, and that's really all you have to pull off. In an electoral college system, because you need kind of a puzzle piece situation going on and you have to win certain states and kind of finagle it that way, it makes it nearly impossible to steal an election because you have to rig the vote essentially in multiple places, and you have to make sure that you do your math right, and it all has to get pulled off absolutely perfectly correctly. You can't just rig it in one place. It's kind of like rigging a chess game. All right, it's next to impossible to do. So the Electoral College helps protect against that. So I think that not only is doing away with the Electoral College incredibly ridiculous because it's so transparent what the left is trying to do in order to set up elections to never be able to be won by a Republican again, it's also incredibly insulting to the founding fathers who gave us one of the most ingenious election systems in the history of mankind and who protected us against what they understood were natural human corruption. Natural things that those in power were going to want to seize more power, right? To disenfranchise people that they don't like or to only give power to a certain segment of the population. They wrote this in to protect the country from that. So it's incredibly insulting to one of the most ingenious things that has ever been done in government in mankind's history to say, well, now we just want to do away with that because we don't like the fact that Donald Trump got elected. It was Hillary's turn. And oh, by the way, we want to set it up so that y'all never, ever win again. That's my opinion on the Electoral College. Thank you so much for asking. Thank you for being with me today. I know we got through a lot, but if you have any questions or if there are any topics you want to address in the future, make sure that you let me know. Give me your feedback. I really appreciate it. I will see you guys back here next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern on Facebook and YouTube. Have a great week.